Review Book One was all about the book starter ride for the last 40 years, and today I have my special guest. She's the author of several books, and the latest one, Fear Intelligence, a practical framework for leading beyond fear, no other than Miss Jacqueline Wales. Welcome, Miss Jacqueline, on Book 101 Review. And can you please introduce more about yourself that I miss?
Thank you. I am the author of the Fear Intelligence book, as you noted. I'm also the author of The Fearless Factor and The Fearless Factor at Work, and a novel called When the Crow Sings, set in Scotland. I'm also a TEDx speaker on Unleash the Power of Fear, and my focus is always on leadership and helping executives, managers, and so forth to develop better practices around communication, fear based behaviors, trust issues, and all kinds of stuff like that. Basically, helping people to get more mindful about who they are and develop their self awareness.
Miss Jacqueline Wales, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world, and hoping for more and more empowering books like this to come. So let's start with the name itself, Fear Intelligence. Most people see fear as a weakness or a barrier. How does your framework redefine fear as a form of intelligence that leaders can actually leverage?
So, when we think about fear, fear is one of the greatest motivating forces in human nature. And this is something that most people don't stop to think about. What is fear? It's a driver for growth. It's that little alarm or a big alarm that goes off in your head and in your body that tells you something needs to change. And what happens? Most people run in the opposite direction. They distract, they avoid, they find ways to not have to deal with the very things that would make a very big difference in their life. And when I came upon the idea of fear intelligence, it was based on this idea that fear is something that when we are ready to face it, and I use an acronym in the book called FEAR, and basically it's face it, show up, feel the feelings, deal with what it is, then you've got to explore it. What are the stories you keep telling yourself? What are the ways in which you limit the way in which you live in the world? Then we've got to be able to act on it. We've got to change the narrative. We've got to take different behavioral changes. And then ultimately we got to rise with it, which is have the courage to change, have the courage to challenge yourself, and have the courage to move beyond wherever it is that you're feeling stuck in life. And that becomes the fear acronym right there. But the first step is you've got to acknowledge it in the first place.
Definitely acknowledge people and let it go. In your work, how do you distinguish between a rational, data driven fear that signals a real threat and a more generalized anxiety that is often based on imagined futures? Why is it distinction critical for a leader?
So here's the thing, unless we're being physically threatened, and most of us are not, most of our fears are psychological. They are based on patterns of behavior and thinking that have been active for a very, very long time. In fact, may have been inherited through intergenerational stuff. And I will tell you a story about my life, for instance. I grew up in poverty. I grew up in a working class neighborhood of Scotland. And there was a tremendous amount of anger, resentment, frustration, fear, and definitely a lot of the concomitant behaviors of alcoholism, violence, and so forth that came about as a result of those negative emotions. As a child, you don't know the difference. And so you get bombarded by this stuff. And let's be honest about this, there are more unhappy families than there are happy families. And so, of course, when you're raised in that kind of environment, you're going to keep following it through over the lifetime of however you are until you're ready to stand and face what it is that's going on. And that was my story. I had to actually stand and look at What is it that you're the most afraid of? And how is it impacting your life?
Indeed, so Miss Jacqueline, you talk about leading beyond fear, not eliminating it. What is the positive evolutionary role of fear, and what happens when try to completely eradicate it from our teams or organizations?
Well, I like to say you never eradicate it. You come to understand it. But here's the thing, fear is a very primitive reaction. And then if we look at the brain and what is happening here, there's the idea of a perceived threat, and it can be real or imagined. It makes no difference. The brain doesn't know the difference. But then what happens is it sets off a chain of reactions. So we've heard about the amygdala, which is a big piece of, a little piece of the back of the brain, but it sets off a whole hormonal reaction. The hormonal reaction leads into the sympathetic nervous system, and before you know it, you're full blown emotion. You're sweating, you're dry mouth, your stomach is churning, whatever the case may be. That's the moment when you start attaching a story to it. Because let's face it, all of our emotions need a story. Otherwise, it's just a feeling, and we leave it at that. So once you've attached a story to it, what are the behaviors that are attached to that story? Then becomes the piece. But yes, fear is a primitive emotion that was meant to keep us safe. But unfortunately, it's taken to the extreme.
Miss Jacqueline, tell us. Fear is much a physical experience as a mental one. How does fear intelligence teach leaders to recognize the psychology of fear before it hijacks decision making?
Well, here's what will happen frequently is you're in it before you know you're in it. You start having a reaction because fear is a reaction. Your job as a human being is to notice that reaction and take a pause. Just stand back a moment from it before you dive into the next piece of action, which, as I said, can be to avoid, to distract, to presume it's not really important. And anxiety is associated with this, by the way. People often say, what's the difference between fear and anxiety? Anxiety is the feeling that fear creates in the first place. So you have to be able to take the pause. You have to be able to step back and you have to go, okay, so what is this telling me? You have to use fear as data, as information. So to do that, we need to take the moment to investigate, to explore, which is the second part of the acronym. You got to explore why am I feeling what I'm feeling? Why am I thinking what I'm thinking? And what is the outcome of all of this? And have I seen this before? And if I've seen it before, well, again, what is it telling me? So you're always in that investigative mode.
What is the most common unexamined fear you see in otherwise component or competent leaders, and what is the hidden cause of not addressing it?
I think the most common one that I come across in my working with leaders is that there's a wee voice inside of you that says, I'm not good enough. I'm not capable. I'm not worthy. I'm not valued. I'm not respected. And they cover it up with a mask. And the mask is, I've got everything together. My life is just fine and we're doing okay. But when you scratch the surface of things, you find the self-doubt, find the fear of making the wrong decisions, you find the fear of not being able to take care of your family, you find the fear of failure, you find the fear of uncertainty, which is I need to control everything. And if I don't control everything, then everything's going to go to hell in a handbasket, as they say. So there's a lot of ways in which the undercurrent of fear is operating, but we put on a mask and we show up and we look like we've got it all together. But inside there's a deep uncertainty, a deep sense of not knowing exactly who you are and what it is that you bring to the world.
Miss Jacqueline, in a high stakes moment, when fear arises, what is specific practical technique from your framework to create?
So the first thing I mentioned earlier was to take the pause. I call it the 90-second pause. And this came about, you've probably heard of Jill Taylor Bolt, who did a TED talk on having a stroke. She wrote a book about it as well. And as a neuroscientist, she had the ability to observe herself going through this stroke. So she watched as her body started to break down. She started to watch as her speech was slurred and her eyesight was going. And as a scientist, she was extremely curious about it. And what she realized was that there was a 90-second pause of being able to observe. And so that becomes the number one piece for me is just sit with the discomfort. Because here's the thing, we need the discomfort to change. You need to get comfortable being uncomfortable in order to change. So I like to say this that the first thing you notice when you're deeply uncomfortable with something is take a moment to just reflect. Don't take any action, just sit and think about it and try to change the thinking that wants to send you into drama, that wants to send you into a future that's filled with all kinds of negativity, and just observe what's going on right this minute. That would be number one in my mind. The second piece of this is notice the voices in your head. Notice the messages that you constantly give yourself about not being capable, about not being good enough, not being worthy. Think about how you're constantly asking for validation about who you are and what's important to you. Seeking approval is a big fear based behavior, and too many people fall into that.
How much of the fear leader's experience is tied to their ego? Fear of being wrong, looking weak, or losing its status? And how can fear intelligence help disentangle those egos' needs from the organization's true needs?
Well, I would say all of those are active in a lot of leaders, frankly. We need to look good in order to be good, kind of thing.
Yes.
So when we're looking at the fear intelligence piece again, self awareness is a big part of this. Now, there's been studies done, and I mentioned this in the book also, that show that most people think they know who they are. The truth of the matter is they don't. Only about 10 to 15% of people really understand who they are and can describe who they are and are confident in who they are. And the number might even actually be smaller than 10 to 15%. So most people are kind of winging it as they go through life. We'll pretend that we know who we are. We'll pretend that we know what we're doing. And they go around with this deep insecurity that is covered over by status, by role, by whatever it is that you want to project out into the world about your ego. But the whole idea of the ego is a huge issue, and of course, it takes a lot of soul searching to understand the true nature of how your ego is driving your life.
Miss Jacqueline, what are the subtle verbal or behavioral cues in a team meeting that signal unspoken fears are present and hindering progress?
Well, let's start with speaking up. If there are too many people silent in the room, and I've seen this happen, then we know that fear is active. What we see often when we're paying attention to what's on in the room, and I'll give you an example of it. I worked with a CEO who was a very big personality. And when he entered the room, everyone else got very quiet because he sucked all the air out of it. He took over. He basically laid it down about this is how it's going to go and this is how we're going to do things. And nobody wanted to oppose him. The fear of opposing him was that I'll lose my job. The fear of opposing him was why is my opinion more important than his? The fear of entering into a difficult conversation is because I hate confrontations. And so we silence ourselves. You also see that there's an avoidance of decision making. The decision making gets shoved around so that other people can take the decisions and not you. Again, that's the insecurity speaking. Or the other side of that is we have a go along to get along type of attitude. That's fear speaking also. So there's many different shades of how fear shows up in the workplace, but these are the big ones that I can point to that I think most people would recognize.
Miss Jacqueline, draw the direct line for us. How does systematically addressing fear unlock innovation and creativity that otherwise remains dormant within a team?
So think about if you've got a great idea and you think that this great idea is going to be a very important piece in building out whatever the case may be, whether it's a product, whether it's a program, or whatever. But you've got another voice in the room that seems to be a lot more confident. It seems to have a lot more going on for it than you do. You will silence yourself again. That becomes a big problem. But however, when you face your fear, when you see the insecurity that's speaking loud and clear to you, and you're willing to step up and take a chance that what you have to say is important, you're moving the needle. And frequently get surprised because people will tell you, wow, that's a great idea. Let's see how we can explore that. Surprise yourself. That's really what it comes down to. Surprise yourself by speaking up and taking a chance. Because here's what I like to say: people who avoid risk never really make anything important in life. Again, you've got that go along to get along kind of attitude. So the creation and the innovation comes about by being bold enough to express yourself even when you're uncomfortable.
Miss Jacqueline, as an author, what are your short term and long term goals?
Well, I think, as an author, I've had a lifetime of experiences, several decades of understanding what fear does to you, because everything I write about in my books, everything that I advise on and work with people on, I know these behaviors. I know these mindsets. It was me. It was how I silenced myself. It was how I avoided innovating. It was how I avoided making proper decisions. And I looked at a lot of ways in which I self sabotage myself too, because that's another big piece of what's in this book. How do we self sabotage ourselves? And mostly it's because we know how to blow ourselves up at the right moment.
Good luck to your goals, Miss Jacqueline. I'm looking forward for more success and more empowering books like this to come. And what would be your piece of advice for those people out there want to be an author like you?
Well, I would say have something important to say, number one. Lots of people tell me I want to write a book, and my first question is why? Writing a book is not an easy task, and if you don't have a whole lot to say, that's really important. Then it's a lot of work. And here's the other thing about writing a book: it's not just writing the book; it's what you do with it afterwards. As a very good friend of mine, who's also an author, said to me, "It's a grind after you've written the book." So, and there's a lot of goes into this. This book looks fabulous. That book cover alone took a lot of impressions to finally get the right one. So there's a process to it, and it's a very complicated process. And I'm no doubt your previous authors have said the same thing to you, Daniel, so that write a book, but make sure that you've really got something important that you want to say. And by the way, don't think a book is making money, because it doesn't do that. It creates credibility. That's what it is.
Yes, credibility indeed. And Miss Jacqueline, thank you for that advice. And can you please recommend a book or books that influence your journey?
I think one of the books that I really enjoyed, and we've all used this, is Man's Search for Meaning, which is Viktor Frankl's book after he experienced the Holocaust and being in the camps, and really finding your purpose in life. And that, I think, was one of the seminal books that influenced me many years ago to start thinking, what is the purpose of my life? Why am I here? And it became this help people understand that fear is something we can use not to destroy ourselves, but to actually create a good life and a much more positive point of view. So that would be one of the books that I definitely would say take a look at if you haven't already, because it's pretty classic at this point.
Thank you for that recommended book, Miss Jacqueline. So, what is the ultimate legacy of a leader who has mastered for intelligence? How is their organizations different long after they're gone?
I think what they've created is an environment of trust, an environment where people feel safe to speak up, where they have left an impression that people would look at that individual and say, that's a role model. That's someone that I truly respect. That's someone who gave a lot to the organization, who was transparent, who was vulnerable at times, and who truly brought the best of themselves to the work that they did and to the people that they served. Because you cannot be a leader if you don't have followers, and you only have followers if they respect and trust you to do the right thing. And if you're leaving a legacy behind you and that you've moved on, and you hear this from people all the time, who is your best boss in life? It was someone who cared. It was someone who gave of themselves selfishly, unselfishly, and who allowed others to rise and shine around them. And that's the person who leaves a legacy.
Indeed. Miss Jacqueline, before we wrap up our discussion for today, I'm inviting you to please do listen to my other podcast because my abstract essay is already in fifth season, abstract poetry in second season, and my book 101 review in fifth season too. Comedy 101 in second season, and my food 101 in fifth season as well. Geography 101 in fourth season, and my baby podcast Law 101, and mental health 101, love letters in third season, and my movie 101 review and music 101 in fourth season, and science 101 and sex 101 in its second season. Please listen to them or wherever you listen your podcast. So, Miss Jacqueline, if you could leave every leader with one fundamental shift in mindset regarding their relationship with fear, what would it be?
I think one thing to say, obviously, is take time to examine. Take time to read this book. This book is a full compendium of fear-based behaviors, and it gives you a lot of great solutions that I'm going to be eventually putting out as a workbook. And we have some programs that we've already created around this book as well. But the whole idea of becoming fear intelligent is, you know who you are, you know what pushes your buttons, and you know how to react to those buttons being pushed, so that you can start to be a better human being than you currently are. Because after all, we all want to be a better version of who we are. But most of us don't take the time to go figure that out. This book will help you figure that out.
Indeed, Ms. Jacqueline Wales, thank you so much again for sharing your knowledge and wisdom to the world. And we are hoping for more and more and more empowering books like this to come. So, can you please invite our listeners to support your books, your advocacy, or whatever projects that you're doing right now?
Thank you. The website to go to is called fearintelligence.co. That's CO. And you can also find the book on Amazon.com.
Yes, people, let's support Miss Jacqueline Wales because if you support her, as I said, more and more empowering legacy to come. So, Miss Jacqueline, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Daniel. It's my pleasure to be here.
Monica, people, see you soon.